So we're in a bit of a situation, ain't we? If you pay any attention to the news, world events, things are not going so hot. And our channel, we deal with mechanical things, not political things, and not, we try to keep things on a nuts and bolts level. So, yes, I agree with you, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about surviving the situations that we're in as gearheads, right? Gearhead survival. So inflation is like one of those things. You print trillions and trillions of dollars, it's going to come home to roost. And we're seeing gas prices now like we haven't seen in a long time, and they're heading up. I mean, I've seen some numbers in California with $6, $7 a gallon. It's pretty crazy. Here in Tennessee, we're still under $3 a gallon, but I don't think for very much longer. So we deal with mostly vintage cars, classic cars, hot rods, muscle cars, basically all of the same stuff we were dealing with in the 1970s. And in the 1970s, we had the gas crisis. This was 1972, 1973, when the Arabs, the OPEC, decided to turn off the tap. And that also was economic backlash. It was revenge because at the time, the price of a barrel of oil was 1/10 of an ounce of gold, and it was immediately convertible. And when Nixon closed the gold window to international redemption in 1971, the Arabs got mad, turned off the tap, and the energy crisis came to be. That also pretty much changed the world because at the time, up until that period, we didn't care about gas mileage. 10 miles to the gallon, 12 miles to the gallon, who cares? It's 25 cents, 28 cents a gallon, go for it. Well, it went to $1 and $1.50, $2 in 1973. That allowed the Japanese to come in because the Japanese had already been building small light cars, and they took over a huge portion of our market. Really put a dent. That was like the final straw in Detroit's coffin. So the automakers, the American manufacturers, did what they could. They concocted small cars as fast as they could. They had already started with the Pinto and the Vega, the subcompacts, previous to the oil embargo, like as if somebody knew it was coming, right? But by 73, 74, we were in trouble. Gas mileage, even after the embargo ended, when they, and I love the excuse for it, because I remember the first energy crisis. Man, I was there, right? And it was like, oh, we're running out of oil. The world is running out of oil. It's going to be gone in like 10 years, right? So we have to, conserve. I mean, 50 years and 1 trillion barrels of oil. This obviously was enough to go around. So it was strictly an economic play. The automakers were in trouble. The American automakers were in trouble. They did everything they could to try to get the gas mileage of the fleet up. They had cut the speed limit to 55 miles an hour and moved to conserve gas. They started putting small engines and smaller and smaller engines in cars. They were miserable. By the time you got like 1975, right, the average Detroit car, between the emission controls and all of the measures that had been taken to increase gas mileage, had really taken its toll. And those cars were miserable. The Malaise era was more about just like the cars didn't look like they had any personality. They really had no personality. They had no spunk. The American manufacturers tried several different models, several different themes, and one that caught on really big was the Pinto MPG. Like they threw it right there in the title, the Pinto MPG. Sold a bunch of them. Chrysler didn't have anything that small and couldn't tool up anything that small in that amount of time. But they had the A-bodies, and the A-bodies were relatively light. Even though an A-body, a Duster or a Dart, Valiant, even though they're fairly large cars, they weren't that much heavier than the Pintos and the Vegas. A 300-pound difference, a 400-pound difference. So for 1976, Chrysler decided that they were going to play the mile per gallon game. And they came up with two models, the Feather Duster, right? Crazy name, right? The Feather Duster and the Dart Lite. I had a Feather Duster. I had a Feather Duster that I bought at the Bordentown auction back in, I guess it was 1982 or so, and I had it for a couple of weeks. I loved that car. It was the same color as this. It was a 76 Duster, Feather Duster, had a little sticker here that said Feather Duster. And at the time, like, nobody knew what it was. It was like, the most obscure thing in the world. It was still a relatively new car. And it rode like a new car, and it looked like a new car, and it smelled like a new car. And the damn thing was just a ball to drive. Yeah, I know, at the time, I was surrounded by big blocks and all the other stuff, but you still have to, like, commute, right? So, for that purpose, for that general driving around, it was a great car, and it knocked down really good gas mileage. I remember getting upwards of around 28 to 30 miles to the gallon on the highway with this thing, and around town 22, like that. They were rated, now the Chrysler rated them at 24 and 36 on the highway, so obviously under perfect conditions, 24, 36 miles per gallon. There were tests done on these cars, road tests. One of them I remember reading was 38. They achieved 38 miles to the gallon. I guess they took one of those cars and just hypermiled it, and they got 38 miles to the gallon. How the hell did they do that? How do you get something that would normally get 18 to 20 miles to the gallon and pump it up that high? Well, the Feather Duster there was nothing really radical about the car, but Chrysler used basically the same mindset, the same mentality that made for the factory race cars, and they applied it to the Duster. Efficiency is what it's all about. They made the car as efficient as possible. So one of the main differences, the biggest structural difference between the Feather Duster and the Dart Lite and the standard regular Duster was they used all of the bracing under the hood and under the trunk lid was aluminum. It had a steel skin, but all of this was aluminum. Same thing for the trunk. The bumper brackets, which the car actually has the same, basically you could be looking at a Feather Duster here, except this is a 73 or 74, This is a 74 and that's 76. But other than minor trim differences, they're the same. The bumper brackets front and back on the Feather Duster were made out of aluminum, and the door hinges were also stamped out of aluminum. Very hard to find, very sought after pieces. Overall, they saved 187 pounds over the standard Duster, the equivalent standard Duster. It helped. The rear end was a 7 1/4, it had a 276 gear. With the automatic, there were two versions of it. The first, the 4-speed was the standard version, and it was the first application of Chrysler's 833 overdrive transmission, and that's where third gear actually becomes high and fourth gear is an overdrive. Aluminum housing on that, again, to save weight. Both the automatic and the stick came with the 7 1/4 rear, 276 or 294 gears. The engine itself was the standard 225/6, but they used an aluminum intake manifold instead of the cast iron one that's on here. The only other year that they used aluminum intake manifold, single barrel aluminum intake manifold, was 1960. They used the aluminum intake manifold. They used a low restriction exhaust. It was the same exhaust that they used the following year when they did the Super 6 on the Aspens and the Velares. It was just a larger head pipe and a low restriction muffler. The ignition was set for a quicker curve, because the quicker you can get the timing in, the more responsive the car is going to be, the snappier it'll be, and the less foot you've got to give it to move a distance. So the less foot you have to give it, the less throttle opening, the less fuel it's going to drink. So it was tuned for responsiveness. It was the primary thing. And the carburetor was a single barrel carburetor. It was the same Holley carburetor that they used on the standard 225/6, but it was calibrated, or it was jetted a little on the lean side. You'd never know it by driving it. Those cars, that car, the one that I had, was fantastic. It was an absolute joy to drive. It was no rocket ship, it was no hot rod or anything like that, but it was a fun car, it was a light car, it was responsive, it was just a happy car. And you know, the sad thing about those Feather Dusters and Dart Lites is that in the 1980s, once everything started to like ease up with the gas mileage and the price of gas went down relative to everything else, people took those cars and they gutted them and turned them into race cars, because, well, it's already got all of the race car stuff in it. Now throw a 360 or a big block or a Hemi in a thing and go make smoke. Which is a shame, because they really were nice cars. Today, you can probably still find one intact, but they're starting to bring collector money. Not only because, you know, of their rarity, but their oddity, but also because they fit the times that we're in right now and the times that we're going to. So, that's the story of the Feather Duster and the Dart Lite. But as far as us, as far as we're going to go, we need to see. We cover all aspects of these classic cars and all aspects of their performance, and part of performance and part of the realities that we're dealing with now and the realities we're going to be dealing with for years is that gas is going to get expensive. It's going to get scarce, and not because we're running out of it, but because of things. It's going to get scarce, it's going to get taxed higher, it's going to be, we're going to more or less end up in a situation like they've had in Europe for years, where gas is just, where we were paying $1.50, $2 a gallon for it, they were paying the equivalent $8 to $10 a gallon. And it didn't stop them from playing around with cars, and it ain't going to stop us from playing around with cars. But we've got to juggle our priorities just a little bit and start looking at the economy end of things. We're going to be doing that. We have a couple of our vehicles that we're going to start working towards the gas mileage, the fuel efficiency sort of thing. So we're going to work on tune-up, we're going to work on aerodynamics. Aerodynamics are a big thing. Reducing parasitic losses, all of the standard things that you would make a car to be more efficient, to go fast. Well, we're going to apply those things to our drivers and try to get as much gas mileage as possible. So just stay with us. We'll be working on this as we go along. So that's it. The Feather Duster, right? I think I'd like to find one, or maybe even perhaps clone one out of this car. This would be the perfect candidate. It's covered with cobwebs. I painted this thing like last summer and it's just parked it back here and hasn't moved since. We'll do something with it soon. I'll see you tomorrow.